Oh, here we go. Right here.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be able to speak directly to a lot of our Greek fans, a lot of the players in Greece, and to answer some questions submitted directly from the Greek WoW community.
Okay.
So let me just go through these, and I'll read off the list of questions and where they came from, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so first off, we actually have a not game-related, more personal question from Stavros Vergos. Ian, you have Greek ancestry. How has your Greek heritage affected you in your work on World of Warcraft? How often do you visit your yaya in Athens? And when will we have the chance to get some of her recipes as a food buff in WoW? So,
what's this?
Yeah, I think obviously my father is Greek.
That's cool.
Genethicus in Athena, and he's
I didn't even know that.
Growing up, listening to his bedtime stories of ancient Greek mythology, that definitely shaped a lot of my outlook, inspired my passion for just fantasy worlds, for exploration, for just the imagination. That in some ways led me to play World of Warcraft, and led me to work on World of Warcraft.
So, all right.
Growing up, I had the great fortune of being able to go to Greece many summers.
Let me look over here and see what the other questions are. Oh, here we go. This is a good question. Gear swap in Mythic Plus has been a huge factor in BFA, and many times it would determine if you end up getting the key or not. For example, hero swapping gear for specific pulls to do more damage. I feel like they've kind of already answered that. Are there any unique answers here? The world, 3 PvP characteristics. How should PvP be balanced? Okay, yeah, that's okay. Where's the next question here? I'm gonna see what else there is. Let's get the question 2 minutes in, and some. Oh, it's 2 minutes in from Method Roger. Okay. Oh, okay. So Method Roger sent in his own question. With the introduction and continuous development of Mythic Plus system, it seems like there isn't a lot of interest in joining a guild, really heroic Mythic anymore, which leads to the disbanding of guilds. Yeah. Okay.
On to actual questions. So we have this question from Roger Brown in Method, of course. With the introduction and continuous development of the Mythic Plus system, it seems that there isn't a lot of interest in joining a guild and raiding heroic or mythic anymore, which leads to the disbanding of guilds. Mythic Plus dungeons are great, but are there any plans to give some new incentives for people to enter or create new guilds and raid as a group, like guild halls,
Roger Brown's
rewards,
a real
or
one.
other bonuses to be gained? So we agree that it's something that definitely concerns us. On the one hand, we're very excited about having opened up high-end, competitive, cooperative play to this whole new group of players with a lower barrier to entry than a formal raid schedule, and Mythic Plus is great. At the same time, it's important to us that there remain unique incentives and rewards for challenging yourself, for going in with a larger group of players, and having that different, massively social experience.
Great. So then what are we going to do?
At the very high end of the competitive scene, I think we've seen a lot of continued interest as Uldir has unfolded. There are really just as many guilds as in the past doing Mythic and pushing high content. We've kind of formalized leaderboards for that through our Hall of Fame system that we've added. Now, that said, especially with the removal of class set pieces that used to be uniquely available from raids, we're aware that, that's a problem that I think we need to solve, and we're going to be looking forward over the course of the rest of the
so they don't know what they're going to do.
Beyond to make sure that there are still some unique benefits and rewards for going into raiding. I think ideally, each path of endgame progression should offer some unique benefits that make it distinctly compelling. And the strongest player, the most well-rounded player, should actually be the one who's able to excel in all of them, though focusing on any one individually should still lead to great strength and success. Okay, next question from Tassos Rafaelidis. Going into Battle for Azeroth, there's a big change in Mythic Plus. Gear swapping is not allowed anymore. What are the thoughts behind this change? Gear swapping in Mythic Plus has been a huge factor in BFA, and many times it would determine if you end up timing the key or not. For example, healers swapping gear for specific pulls or to do more damage. So, in this case, and this is from this is a member of the PogChamp MDI team, just to be clear.
Do you guys like the answer that Ian gave for Roger? The correct answer, by the way, guys, is I don't know, because we didn't get one.
Clear. So this is something that we actually thought about changing partway through Legion, but didn't want to do so in the middle of an expansion because of how reliant many people's strategies had become on swapping gear, especially legendaries. I think when we look at World of Warcraft, we view in a lot of ways an entire Mythic Plus dungeon the way we view a single boss encounter. And that's why you can't change talents in the middle of the dungeon. It's why you can't respec in the middle of the dungeon. Even if you're dropping in and out of combat over the course of the run, some of the choices in terms of the best talents, the best gear, are most interesting when you're weighing the entire range of situations the dungeon's going to offer, right? Maybe whether it's AoE versus single target choices, or whether you want one type of defensive or utility trait or talent.
I want to pause this here. And what he's saying makes sense. And I want to make sure that's completely clear right now. What he's saying absolutely makes sense. And what do I do with my hands? Well, you get timed out for spamming. So anyway, his answer makes sense. But the problem is that it doesn't feel good. And this is so many of the other problems that WoW has right now, is that the answers that we are receiving make sense, but they don't feel good. And that's what I was talking about before, about the developers not understanding players on an emotional and psychological level. Now, they understand it methodically, and they can look at numbers and make decisions on that, and the logic behind their decisions is not entirely wrong. The problem is that whenever you get into the mind of a player, they don't know how to influence that mind to enjoy the game. That's the issue.
Versus another, I think if you're just speccing or just gearing for a specific boss or a specific pull of trash in the dungeon, I think oftentimes those can become really easy choices to make, actually. It just becomes about collecting the right gear and having all of your macros set up so that you can, swap between pulls as you go. I think there's more high-level decision-making depth in a world where you make that choice once up front. And it also makes success in the dungeon more about your moment-to-moment combat gameplay, your positioning, your decisions that you make on the fly, and not about having all the right macros set up to swap in and out ahead of time. Next question from...
I think that's also a big paradigm shift they've made, is that beforehand, especially in like Burning Crusade and Vanilla WoW, a lot of the challenge to raiding occurred outside of the raid. So you're talking about being in a guild, being able to get everybody in on time, being able to not have any drama in the guild, having the right fire resistance gear, farming the right consumables, doing the right profession quest where you get the items to bring them into the raid that help you kill the boss. And all these things that you did outside of the raid made the raid, in a way, more accessible to more people, because everybody else was able to approach those outside activities on their own time, which made raiding a lot more accessible for a lot of people in terms of a gameplay perspective. Now, obviously, a lot of them couldn't raid still because they didn't have the time for it, but from my perspective, I think that system before was more fulfilling to players because they knew that the things that they were doing outside of the raid were leading them to a greater goal. And that's I think the disconnect that's happened, and the paradigm shift that occurred, I think, in Cataclysm, whenever they fixed or they switched that and they made the difficulty focused around raids themselves.
Monosalupis, the three PvP characteristics are burst, mobility, and CC. How should they be balanced in a spec, and which class is tougher to balance while preserving its unique characteristics?
It's a stupid question. I'm going to skip that one.
It's hard for me to speak. I'm not an expert these days on the nuances of PvP balance, but for now, I think we feel pretty good about how the squishes have played out.
Like, because you know what he's going to say, right? He's like, well, you want to make sure they're all the different, but they're all the same too, because you don't want to have something that's too strong or too weak, right? I mean, it's obvious what he's going to
say. Next question is from Chris Diamantis. Why did some of the classic raid buffs, like Mark of the Wild or Blessing of Kings, not make a comeback when Arcane Intellect and Fortitude did?
Well, Blessing of Might did, right? Or Blessing of Wisdom?
We definitely... We look to bring back some of these classic buffs for a couple of reasons. One is there's something... Having some buffs in the picture, there's something nice and ceremonial about, all right, let's get buffed up before we pull this boss. You hear those spell impacts. It feels like you're getting ready, like you're powering up to go into
I agree with this, absolutely.
But also, it's added the social element to it. It makes sure that most people are stronger in a group, in a raid group, than they are on their own. But it also gave a couple of classes that could use some extra utility, some value to their presence, an extra reason to be brought. Now, Paladins and Druids, yes, traditionally they had raid buffs, but frankly,
they have battle
in the
res.
Legion and Battle for Azeroth environment,
that's why
they already have plenty of utility. when you bring a paladin to your group, you have all of their blessings, as well as other hybrid utility that they bring.
Yes.
Druids, of course, have excellent mobility. They have battle res. They have innervate if you're a caster, stampeding roar if you're a tank or DPS. Druids we're not seeing having any problem with representation, whether it's in dungeons or in raid groups. And so
if you take that comment right there and you look at it face value, you can see how that does kind of make sense. But I want to look at the background of that comment and explain how that reinforces what I've been saying is the problem with the game. So what he's saying is that he's basing this off of participation metrics and the amount of people that are getting into raids, but at the same time, players are not happy and they don't feel good because they're not getting back things that made their class feel complete. So this is another example where the player feel is being sacrificed at the expense of analytics.
There isn't really a problem to solve there. I think we get some of the benefit of having buffs just from having a couple, and we're only going to add a new ability if a class actually needs it for differentiation. And just the standard stamina and int buff, I think, covered it for mages and priests. It was cool to be able to bring back those old school iconic abilities, and then the advantages that some others get came from, let's say, Warrior Battle Shout, which covered the physical damage dealers to complement
that's right
the magic damage dealers.
Warriors are the best
in
class.
The future, if we get to a place where, for whatever reason, paladins or druids are seen as not really offering much to a group, it's something we could consider. But I think
most paladins suck, so we're already there.
And strong utility that they already bring, and find ways to make that even more valuable if it's feeling like there isn't a reason to bring those classes. But we're just not seeing it right now. Okay, so next question from Ignatios Defterevos. Loot has always been a major factor in WoW. It could be a reward or a breaking point for a player or a guild. Over the years, there have been many changes to how loot works and drops. In recent expansions, we have the Warforged Titanforge systems that can be extremely rewarding in some cases and disappointing in others. You decided to keep the system in Battle for Azeroth, and in addition to the personal loot that you're going to apply to all modes, that means someone who wants to min-max a character will have to grind all modes every week with the hope of looting a Titanforge upgrade. Have you considered a cap applied to the loot that drops in lower difficulties? So, okay, well, a few pieces to this to break down.
No, that's a no. So
why does Warforging and Titanforging exist? I think the origins of the system actually go back.
Because you want people to do the raids even after they got all the gear in order to force them to continuously chase a carrot that doesn't taste very good. Here's the problem, is that WoW, they give you so many carrots, and then other times there are carrots that are so... It's like, imagine if there's a carrot on a stick, but the stick and the carrot are on the moon. Are you even going to try to go for that carrot? No, because it's too far away. Unless you're Lance Armstrong or, what's his name, Buzz Lightyear, it's not going to happen. But if the carrots are too close, you're going to eat all the carrots, and you're going to get fed up.
In some ways to Mists of Pandaria, when it was first called Thunder Forging in Throne of Thunder.
Yep.
But it's become a game-wide system that has been uncapped in more recent expansions. So years and years ago, loot was much harder to come by, period. I remember my guild in Burning Crusade, we killed Gruul, the dragon.
You guys like that? Good.
Killer every week for a year and a half. Even long after we had Black Temple on farm, we're going back and killing Gruul in the hope that he would drop a Dragonspine trophy trinket that all of our rogues needed, and we'd only ever seen 2 in like 10 months of killing him. And when that finally dropped, it was amazing.
Yes.
But, again, loot was much, much harder to come by. There were fewer sources of it. And if you didn't raid, good luck. I want to ask you guys something. What do you think the chances are that Ian has the same vivid memories of items and pieces of gear that he received during Legion and Warlords of Draenor that are similar to the experiences that he had with Dragonspine Trophy? Can he name those items by name? Probably not. Actually, he probably can because he's the game director, he's the game developer. But as a player, individually, he probably doesn't have the same attachment to them because it didn't matter. And again, this goes back to what I've been saying the whole time.
they are fundamentally disconnected with how players think, how players feel, and what motivates them to do things.
Years, we've been more generous. We've decided to move away from a space where you just can kill a boss or run some content week after week after week and never see the item you want. Drop rates are higher across the board.
That's true.
There's, with personal loot, we have tradability, which gives you another chance at the item. We
Sometimes.
have bonus rolls in Mist of Pandaria, which give you a third chance at the item. And
That's
so in practice,
idea.
We expect players to get things that they want
out
of a raid zone within, a couple of months at least of doing the tier. It's very, very rare. Even if, early on people may grumble about not seeing the trinket they want, it's very rare to actually go a meaningful amount of time into a raid tier without getting the items you want.
That's actually so funny, right? So you guys know Giswiki. Giswiki, Kermit the Frog. He's the raid leader in my guild. We went through all of Antorus, and he never got the trinket from Spinny Boy with the 3 guys. He never got the fucking trinket, dude. It's so funny.
And so Warforging and Titanforging
Kengaroth.
keep some level of interest and potential for growth in those repeated clears. Right? When you're working on Mithrax in Uldir, if you're not a guild like Method, if you're not someone who cleared the raid in the first couple of weeks, you've probably been doing Uldir for at least a couple of months at this point. You might have 8 or 9 kills on Mother, on Talok, on Zekvaz. And most of your raid has the items they want from those bosses.
That's why we stopped doing it.
You're just mindlessly going through the motions otherwise, not really hoping for an upgrade, not having any chance of something good happening to you, just to get back to Mithrax that you were stuck on. Also, it means your raid's not getting much stronger week over week. So Warforging and Titanforging create the opportunity for anything to happen. They do create moments of excitement, as you note. I remember watching the Method stream. I think it was like Sko got a Warforged socketed polearm that dropped halfway through progress. That was a giant upgrade for him on his monk tank.
Yeah.
That made an immediate difference. And in a world where loot is more common, the rare opportunities to have these amazing items retain some of those moments of excitement.
They don't.
Now, we definitely don't want players to feel obligated to go back and clear normal every week or clear heroic every week for the very, very slim chance that something might upgrade.
Which is why, obviously, you introduce Titan Recidivam, which makes it to where you have to go and clear all of them in order to farm towards your Azerite items. Like, don't say that you don't want people to do that if you make people do that. I mean, like what is going on?
While at the same time, people who are doing normal and heroic as their core content, having that opportunity is exciting. I think in practice, as we've seen, most players aren't feeling forced to do that anymore. I think one of the things that really led to it in Legion was set pieces.
What a great
solution. Where people would, want Titanforge versions of set pieces, especially set pieces from older tiers. Also legendaries. I think, many guilds many groups would go back and clear Emerald Nightmare even in patch 7.2 or beyond every week just for more chances at legendaries or the bad luck protection around legendaries. Those are things that we moved away from. The vast majority of groups that do, let's say, mythic raiding today,
that wouldn't even be an issue
definitely
anymore.
Don't do normal Uldir, and most of them have moved on from doing heroic Uldir at all at this point. And so overall, that feels like a healthy place. I think it's up to players to choose where to spend their time, where it's most rewarding, and we're trying to craft the systems of the game such that what is most rewarding should generally be content that's relevant and challenging for you. You're probably much better off doing some high mythic keys with your spare time versus going back and doing lower raid difficulties, hoping for a 1% chance of something amazing to happen that probably won't happen. Next question. So we have another loot question.
See, this is the thing, right? Is that obviously what he's saying is like partially true, but they're fixing problems that they removed. It's like, if the problem is Legion legendaries, then why did you fix it in Battle for Azeroth when there aren't any Legion legendaries, but you let it stay there for all of Legion until you added the Awakening Essence system at the end of the expansion that should have been there on release? I just... Oh my god, dude. Oh my god. I don't even like this is insane, man. No Titanforge cap answer. Right, yeah, he didn't answer the Titanforge cap. Like, what value does it add to the game for somebody to be able to get a plus 35 in normal mode? Like, does that really make the game good? I feel like the only people talking about that are people that are demoralized because they've done heroic every single time, and some shitbag that got carried through normal has better gear than them. Again, it's not about it's not about the logic behind it. It's about how it makes people feel, and they don't fucking get it. I don't know if they ever will.
This is from Nick Canelis. I'm studying for my Master's of Science in Applied Economics, and I'm currently working on my final project, which is about loot distribution systems in MMORPG games. That sounds like a pretty cool project. I'd be curious to hear more about it. In another Q&A session you had in March 15th of this year, you mentioned that we can reasonably expect personal loot to be the only option for raids in BFA. You argued that intentionally stacking gear on specific characters within a guild makes it harder to design challenging content for everyone. Many players, especially in high-end guilds, would argue that master loot systems allow the leadership to reward players who demonstrate maximum consistent raid effort, and they're also a valuable tool for raid optimization, like gearing their main tanks for maximum threat or maximum mitigation, for example. Are there plans to cater to these player needs, like changes to personal loot, or is this really the way to go when it comes to the loot distribution process, and why do you feel this way? So, TLDR, personal loot, why are you doing it? Any plans to change it? So, I think this question was asked before Battle for Azeroth came out. Again, apologies for just getting to this now, but it still remains a hot topic for discussion throughout the raid community.
Really slow.
Overall, and I know this will be disappointing to some raid groups, we're happy with how personal loot is working out so far.
It's not disappointing to some raid groups. It's disappointing to all Mythic guilds. Here's how you know that this is a bad decision. Is that in Antorus, they allowed you to use personal loot for the Mythic raid. Every guild that I know of opted not to use it. So whenever every single guild opted not to use the system that Blizzard had intended, they removed that option. If personal loot was actually preferred by those guilds, they would have moved over to personal loot during Antorus whenever they had the option to do both of them.
I think what we've seen in practice as Uldir has gone on is that across entire groups, the best geared guilds, the best geared raid groups, are still the ones doing the hardest content, doing it most efficiently. I think the benefits to removing personal loot are three things. First off, on the lower end of the organization spectrum, there's a lot of guilds that churn through a steady stream of trials. And if you're looking to find a guild in WoW, you often are applying, you're trialing in a place for a few weeks. And historically in a Master Loot world, guilds had very strict control, often had strict control over what they were doing with their loot, and trials were not allowed to get any loot. And your experience as a player just trying to get into raiding in World of Warcraft could very typically be going to a guild, deciding that you don't work out there, or they...
How do you know that? Like, Ian's been in the same guild for 10 years. Like, so he's getting this secondhand. Like, of course that's going to be true. It's like if you join a company, they're not going to pay you the same wage they'd pay you if you worked there for 20 years. If you do anything and you randomly come on to the team and you never put any effort into achieving that team's accomplishments, then obviously the people who achieve the accomplishments that the team is defined by should be the people that receive those spoils for what those accomplishments entail. And the entire idea that participating in a boss kill is the same as progressing on a boss kill and succeeding. Like, imagine, and I think everybody obviously wants to say that it's the same or whatever. Use me as an example, okay? Because a lot of the people that disagree with this don't like me. Use me as an example. The first time that I killed Mythic Argus, I think I parsed at 7%, and I died 3 times on the fight because I had no idea what I was doing. Would it have been fair for me to have personal looted the mount to myself? Because I won the roll on it, but because even though I won the roll, they didn't give it to me because I was useless. It would not have been fair if I had received the mount over all of the other people who put in a lot more work than I did. And that's why I did not receive the mount, and I never complained about it. Well, I did, but I didn't really complain about it.
Wanted to fit someone else in instead of you, and you got literally nothing for your efforts for helping them defeat bosses, maybe even helping them defeat bosses for the very first time in your time in that guild. You move on to another guild, the same cycle would continue. Now, yes, there's a social dynamic here, and this is a social system.
Yeah, you can solve that problem by not hopping guilds all the time and getting kicked out. Here's the thing, right? Is if you have somebody that's finding like a new guild every month, it's because that person can't fit in and they're probably obnoxious and nobody can get along with them. Okay, it's not like every other guild. It's like if you walk down the street and you step in shit, you stepped in shit. But if every single time you walk on the street and you smell shit, you should check your own shoes. If you are the common denominator, you are more than likely also the problem. People that have problems are problems. That's something that I always use with recruitment, and it worked very well.
And something for players to solve or to deal with in their own way. In practice, it was just a different form of control than what we'd come to see in pickup groups that led to us getting personal loot out of pickup groups in past expansions, where, yes, of course, if you are an officer of a guild, if you're running a loot council, Master Loot is an amazing system. You get to decide exactly who gets everything. And of course the Master Looter, of course the person who is on the Loot Council likes Master Loot. There's no system we could create.
Well, everybody else likes it too, or they wouldn't be in the guild because they comply with Master Loot by joining the guild. Everybody in the guild likes it because they use it. If Master Loot was so universally disliked by everybody except for these top 1%, this is like a Bernie Sanders, like, what is this? Like, if it's only the 1% that are benefiting from this, then why don't the 99% make their own guilds with personal loot on their own? In Antorus, it didn't happen.
That is as fulfilling as giving you or you and your friends the ability to control who gets every single item that drops. However, for the majority of players out there, often a more silent majority, that came at the expense.
I love it whenever people use the word silent majority, because it's impossible to define. So the silent majority argument implies not only that most people feel a way that's different than the people that are outspoken, right? But also that the people that are not speaking out share opposite opinions than the people that are speaking out. It's the most nonsensical thing. Like, it's so transparently self-serving, it's embarrassing.
Of a lot of the reward that comes from just playing the game and progression. So that's one thing. On the other end of the spectrum, on the very, very, very high end, it's no surprise that, we've seen in the past top guilds running multiple raid groups in parallel with 4 or 5 alts, maybe even more in some extreme cases, and funneling gear in the first weeks.
I don't know why you guys are using Trump as an example. There were tons of people that are outspoken, like really positive about Trump. He had these huge rallies. Like, if anything, that kind of proves what I'm saying. Like, there were he had huge amounts of support. Like, his rallies had like 10,000 people, like 20,000 people going to these rallies. I'm not saying this in support or against him. This is just a fact. Trump is not an example of the silent majority. Trump is an example of a very loud vocal majority, or not a majority actually, but a large amount of people coming and speaking out. I mean, he had huge rallies. Yeah.
To a handful of specific mains using Master Loot. This effectively quadrupled or quintupled the rate at which they could gear up their raid compared to a regular group that did none of this. This over time led guilds outside of just the top few, top 10, top 20, top 50, top 100, and beyond, to start running at least some split raids. It made it very difficult for us to balance encounters for, to provide a challenge for method during the first week.
Why is that even a goal? Why is it even a goal to provide a challenge for people that play the game 16 hours a day? Like, why would you even think about that? Why would it be in your mind, let's design content that we are putting out as our major feature for the game that has to be challenging for the top 50 best players in the entire world?
They're comparable guilds, while still being a fun...
The reason why it matters is because the mechanics and the way these encounters are designed with these high-end players in mind, and whenever these high-end players are having the content designed for them, it makes it inaccessible for the average player because they're not that good. This is where Asmongold the Casual Advocate comes in. I think the raids have too many fucking mechanics, they're too complex, they require too much coordination, and it makes it unfun for most people. And I think the best example of that is Method themselves whenever they stopped doing Mythic Gahoon.
Satisfying progression experience for the majority of Mythic guilds in weeks to follow. It's very difficult when, going into a raid in Legion like Tomb of Sargeras or Antorus, Method's item level during the first week of Mythic would actually be higher than what typical guilds would have to work with a month later, a month into Mythic. Normally, it's the best guilds in the world are the ones who are doing it undergeared. When they're doing it overgeared, that's really tough. And I think not having that option available, we've seen how that played out in Uldir. I think for those first few guilds, bosses like Mithrax, like Gahoon, and even earlier ones like Vectis were very stern challenges for top guilds. And yet, without needing massive nerfs, without other progression changes, we've seen hundreds of guilds follow in their footsteps with the advantage of more gear, who are able to down those bosses with that advantage. And so it helps the high-end competitive scene as well, but that effect trickles down, where now, if you want to be competitive, if you want to try to push for top 100, let's say you want to try to get on the Hall of Fame, you don't feel compelled to full force or tell all your members to gear up multiple mages, multiple rogues, whatever, for future gear funneling. You can just focus on gearing up your main roster, maybe having...
Is that actually true? And this is a legitimate question. I don't know the answer to this, because I don't know how Method and Limit do things now. Did this actually make them stop farming on their alts, or are they still doing the clears on a bunch of other characters? Preach leveled 3 alts. No, okay, so it Limit does 4 splits. Okay, so it didn't solve the problem. It lessened it. I think that's fair. It did lessen the problem. So designing and forcing personal loot. The best argument is because Trials don't get enough gear, and so Limit only has to make 4 alts instead of 9.
Some off-spec folks or backup classes when you want to, bring in more of one class or another, but that's very different. And when you're playing, you're just playing to get loot. You're playing on your mains to get loot for your mains. Mm-hmm. That feels better all around. And then,
I would agree.
Finally, the third benefit is that it lets us itemize in a somewhat different way. When Master Loot was an option, we still had to design loot tables and design what items we put in the game around the possibility of Master Loot. So very niche items only useful to a few people, whether it's ranged weapons, whether it's shields, whether it's unusual things like two-handed caster weapons, like a two-handed mace or a two-handed caster axe that a shaman could theoretically use. We never made those items. And the way we constructed loot tables, we had to assume that, well, this thing could drop no matter who's in your raid. It doesn't matter if you don't have a hunter. It doesn't matter if you don't have a holy paladin. That caster shield is going to drop. And so moving to World of Personal Loot, we can actually better cater to a wider range of itemization. You'll see more fist weapons, you'll see more shields, you'll see more ranged weapons, and more.
This is a good point.
Because it doesn't matter if an item is only useful for one specialization out of 36. When we know that that item will only ever drop for that one specialization when they're present, we can do a lot more and take more chances there.
This is actually a really good point. What he said makes a lot of sense, and we have seen a more varied itemization. The only thing that I would argue is adding those items to vendors or some sort of secondary source would be better for the game overall than removing a core mechanic that guilds and the social fabric of the high-end community relies on.
Now, finally, I recognize that for tight-knit social groups that weren't abusing any of this, you were giving everybody a fair shake.
Like
you were
Valor
letting
points.
Trials get loot. you just enjoyed being able to share and allocate loot to your tanks or help someone complete a set bonus or give someone a big upgrade that they needed, there's something that we lost here. And I'm not denying that. There is something that we lost here for those groups. But we feel like the change for the majority of players for the game as a whole is a step in the right direction. And once you get past the first few weeks of the new raid tier, I think loot tradability is something that helps with a lot of those problems. If you're trying to gear up somebody who came back to the game or who switched mains, the rest of your raid can still pretty quickly funnel loot to them. Or if you don't need an upgrade, but someone else in your raid does, you can pass that to them. Now, this breaks down a little bit where item level up...
Or you can be forced to pass that to them because that's the guild's rules, and then you have people that don't loot the items, and they loot them in their mailbox later on, and then the officers in the guild have to go through and look at every single piece of gear that somebody has. Like this, it's just... Again, it's like these decisions are made in a vacuum, right? If the problem is trials, like... How many guilds, like, how many trials are typically in a guild? Maybe like 2 or 3 out of a roster of 28 people. So you're talking about making changes for less than 10% of the population of the guild. So you're changing the guild entirely, changing everybody's experience for something that, by definition, is less than like probably 10 or 20% of the population. And you're making it worse for 100% of the population.
Upgrades end up not being... true upgrades for you, and you get something that you don't want to wear, but you also can't trade. That's a symptom of a larger problem where we're trying to, where possible, make item level a better guide for what's actually better. So, overall, that's where things stand. It's an ongoing conversation, but I think, frankly, personal loot is here to stay, and we should be discussing what we want to do with it rather than let's just roll it back to master loot, because...
We don't want to get rid of personal loot. Personal loot is great. We just don't want to be forced into using it. If personal loot is so good, then you wouldn't have had to continuously remove options for people to use something different than personal loot. If it was such a great system, you wouldn't have to remove every other system in order for people to use the system that you think is so great. It's like, imagine this. You have a steak, you have broccoli, and you have spinach. So you hate spinach. So we give you all 3 of them, you're going to eat the steak. Unless you're a bitch, and then you eat the broccoli. But let's say you're going to eat the steak. Well, then they take away the steak, and you have the spinach and the broccoli. It's like, well, you know, I watched a lot of Athene videos back in the day. We're going to eat the broccoli. So you eat the broccoli. They take away the broccoli, and now you're just eating the spinach. You're not eating the spinach because you like it. It was actually the worst option that there was. But they took away every other fucking option, so now you're sitting there eating spinach like Popeye the fucking sailor.
That's not how we're building loot tables anymore, and we feel like the benefits have outweighed the downsides thus far. Next question from Orestes Contos. Any change for solo queue, any chance for solo queue in arenas or ranking systems for Battlegrounds? Battlegrounds seems boring right now with no reward. Also, always matching with players of low skill or players that lack the necessary drive to win makes things worse. It would be awesome if we could see a comeback of tiers or ranks that would make players work up a sweat, and also transmogs like Grand Marshals that would give people reason to actually focus on winning. So, I think we feel pretty good about how the Battle for Azeroth ranked system with clear tiers as you work your way up towards Gladiator has worked out. They're clearly increasing rewards.
He's asking about Battlegrounds.
Great items out of this. You know, I think some of the best availability of powerful PvP gear that rivals the very best stuff out of raids that we've seen in a long time. This is for Battlegrounds. And so within the rated system, there's a very clear progression. Random Battlegrounds and skirmishes, I think we're not looking to make a hardcore competitive environment. Those have always been for more casual players, people who just want to...
There's a problem, right? Is that, like, rated Battlegrounds have such a high barrier to entry, it's almost impossible for anybody to experience... like the PvP that you would see in Warsong Gulch or Arathi Basin or something like that without doing random Battlegrounds. So the issue there is, like, rated Battlegrounds have, like, such a low participation metric because so few people do them, because there's such a high barrier to entry to getting 10 people in the group to do something. That's not even a bad thing. The bad thing is that there's no other way for players to do some form of solo queue random battlegrounds with a ranking or a rating or whatever associated with it that gives them a hidden MMR that allows them to queue up with people that have similar hidden MMRs that's separate than the actual base ranked battle or unrated battlegrounds. I mean, it's not hard.
Hop on, relax, run around a battleground, fight some players. Of course, we want you to win, and the awards are aligned, whether it's your conquest, your honor, the bonuses that you get.
Well, exactly what Nixie said, and I don't think this is a bad thing, right? I mean, because this is just player behavior. Have you tried joining an RBG group before? One loss and everybody leaves, and it takes forever to fill the group. Well, exactly. I mean, you're completely right, man. Yes, I've been in them. Luckily, I'm in, like, at a certain point, once you get high enough, people are able to take losses better. Generally, they are. It's not like an 1800 group. Like, if you get to like a 2800 RBG, you're probably not going to have everybody leave whenever there's a loss. But at the same time, there's still going to be a lot of frustration because you get everybody together and it's just a very tense environment. I don't know what, like, I think Blizzard really should sit down and think about how to make RBGs better. Because I think RBGs have a lot of potential and Blizzard is throwing it in the garbage. To put it into perspective of how much they're throwing it in the garbage, there's no way, like, Hero of the Alliance is the exact same as Gladiator was. If they made Hero of the Alliance, for example, like 26 or 2700 RBG ranking, period, you get the title, you get it, you're done, that would immediately increase the RBG participation. Here's another way to increase it, is if they would add mounts for getting Hero of the Alliance each season. If they did that, then you would see a lot more people participating. And then also, if Guardian of the Alliance gave you something, the reason why we see more people participating in Arena is because it gives them more gear and they have something that they can work towards that's meaningful. RBGs don't have that component, so they have less participation, even though people want to enjoy them.
Otherwise, the rewards are aligned with wanting you to win, but that's always going to be a more relaxed environment, just like any sort of quick play or quick match in other games that have PvP components. Now, for rated arena, rated battlegrounds, I think the reason why solo queuing is not something that we think is a great fit for World of Warcraft when it has worked well in other games is the extent.
I saw something in chat I want to respond to. Someone said that you still get the Vicious Saddle. The Vicious Saddle is not a unique reward to RBGs. It is a reward that you can get from Arena and also RBGs. Generally, it's easier to do it with Arena because there's less of a barrier to entry for Arena and the games are shorter. So in order for you to get 100 wins in Arena in 3v3, it's actually going to be faster than getting 40 wins in an RBG because there's 10 people. So you are getting non-unique rewards, and arenas give unique rewards, and that's why more people participate in Arena, because they're killing two birds with one stone. Yeah, let's time out some of these people that are just spamming the thing, because it's like, it's cool a little bit, but like,
which
I want people to be able to talk about the video, you know?
Composition dependent. What classes you have, what specs you have, what roles you have matter tremendously, and that's not something that's flexible, right? When we create an Overwatch team or a Heroes team, people can switch as needed, and people can play a variety of characters, and we can make sure that you have this exact composition. In order to have good matchmaking in terms of reasonable queue times, matching you with people around your skill level and rating, and making reasonable compositions that work well synergistically and that are matched up against other reasonable compositions, we don't think that that's possible to achieve. Without, again, one of those things would have to give, and it would either be very, very, very long queue times that would be, I think, extremely frustrating, or wild mismatches in skill, or, yes, sometimes, you're frustrated you don't have a healer on your threes team, or other times you have, too many of the same class, and this isn't going to work synergistically. And no one has the ability to switch classes on the fly the way you might in, say, Overwatch, if your team needs a tank or your team needs a support.
Just let people respec in BGs.
We're instead focused on improving the social tools in the game, pre-made group finder, adding communities to make it easier for people to join groups of like-minded folks who are looking to find matches or partners at a given rating. And, that's also a more social experience, which is something that we try
that's a legitimate problem.
Emphasize
that's one way to
as part of
solve
an MMO. Okay, this next question from Vasileos Kondilis. The flex mode was added to WoW with the aim to facilitate easier raid groups. Other than in Mythic, every other raid difficulty supports flex groups, which means it's easier than ever to make truly competitive groups for every circumstance. I believe that the raid difficulty system could be tweaked, merging LFR and normal with the other difficulty levels remaining as they are.
Oh, yeah, this is great.
This way, we can avoid
really,
unneeded
really
content
good.
repetition and narrow down the level gap so that stat squishes aren't needed as often as they are today.
You have to remember, Greece is where Socrates came from. There's a lot of really smart people in Greece.
What are the chances of something like this happening? So, we think the number of difficulties that we've settled on and the difficulty structure that we've had in place since Warlords of Draenor is actually the right fit for World of Warcraft.
Then why, at the end of Mists of Pandaria, did you say there were too many difficulties? Like, whenever they added flex mode, they said this is confusing, there's too many of them. People can change? I'm sure he changed his mind.
Raid Finder and Normal, I think for someone who does Mythic, both of those just seem like, oh, these are casual difficulties.
Okay.
But they're actually serving very different audiences. Normal is for a mix of friends and family groups and pickup groups. And again, it's maybe hard for you to imagine as a Mythic Raider, but there are plenty of groups. There are literally hundreds of thousands of WoW players around the world who spend an entire tier progressing through normal difficulty. Where it's like, okay, a few weeks in, they finally got Fetid Devourer down, and now they're moving on to work on Zul, and they're going to spend a week or two working on normal Zul before they move on to Mithrax. And that's a satisfying and rewarding experience for them, because that's a type of group that they're literally just playing with their friends. They're not going to recruit people for being better players. They're not going to kick people out because they stand in the pools and spawn ads on Zekvaz more often than you might like. They're just going to say, hey, try to do better next time, and keep working at it, and that's a progression that they enjoy.
Okay.
LFR, and this is what we heard really throughout in Mists of Pandaria that inspired us to make this change. LFR does not provide that satisfying experience. LFR is not a social experience. LFR is not a progression experience. And so in Mists, where we had a normal difficulty that was similar to our heroic today, groups like the one I described would find LFR unsatisfying and asocial, and normal, as it was then, to be too difficult. They would kill two bosses or maybe get stuck on hard-on and then not really have a satisfying place to progress. That's why normal exists in the form that it does. Raid Finder is for people who don't want to commit to a schedule or find a large group. It's, you have some free time in the evening, you have an hour in the morning before you head to work, you can jump in, you can check out the end of the story, you can get some gear for your alt, you can finish a quest.
What boss do you guys want to do? How about Zul? Oh, my item level is too low. Because they have like an item level filter thing. I'll log over, okay? Just so I'm not, I don't look like an idiot. Yeah, let me log over. Because my item level is too low, and so they cap it at like 350 or something like that. And, or 360, I don't even know. And so that's why. Yeah, let me log back over. It's not wrong. I did some really casual IRL friends. They did the same thing. Yeah, exactly. Let me go over here. Let me go on my main character. No, because LFRQ takes more than 1 hour. Well, I know that. I mean, obviously the queues take a long time, but there are groups going on pretty much all the time. Like, if there's no Zul groups today, I will be amazed. Because almost always there's people that are putting together groups. And I'll actually look for another boss. Because obviously I think people will just put troll groups up right now. Queue on Tuesday takes 10 minutes. Look, I don't think I've queued LFR at all for like 2 expansions, so I'm not really sure. Okay, here we go. Pre-made groups. Raids, BFA. Let's look Mithrax. 2 of them right there. So there's a group right now that I can join. Right now I can join for Mithrax, 100%. So the whole idea that you need to do LFR, and this is like at 2 p.m., and this isn't like in the evening or anything like that. Yeah, that's 1, right? That's 1 right now at this exact second. If you wait a little bit longer, oh, now there's more, right? Asmon XD. Okay, that one doesn't count. But the other ones are there, okay? And maybe you could... Okay. But you can see there's a lot of groups that people can join. I think the whole idea that people can't find a group to do normal or they don't want to play on a schedule is completely ridiculous and untrue. You can find easily, very, very easily, pug groups any day of the week with the group finder system, and LFR is absolutely not necessary. The fact of the matter is that LFR is for bad players that can't get into those groups because they're shitty and they don't want to get better at the game, and Blizzard wants to make sure that they can still beat every boss. That's what LFR is for. Requirements are mental? No, they're not. Anybody that complains about requirements to get into groups is probably lazy and they don't want to farm out gear themselves.
It's right there. It's a more bite-sized chunk. It's not meant to be this lasting, enduring social experience. It's a chance to see the content, to experience some of the most epic encounters we make, and to have an alternate path for progression. And so those are two different purposes, two different audiences, and we don't think it's possible to merge those two into one single experience without heavily disappointing one or the other, as we've seen in the past. And then moving up from there, I think Heroic is for more organized groups that do value performance on some level, do value class composition. You might actively look to recruit, a priest if you don't have any priest in your raid, or look to recruit a rogue if you don't have any rogue. Unlike a friends and family group, they're just going to take what they have. And then, as we know, Mythic is people who are looking to do all of that at the very highest level and to be the best.
Okay.
Now, I think also just another aspect of this question, so content repetition, I think we've tried to set up the incentives so that guilds feel like and groups feel like they can focus on at most 2 difficulties. Right? If you're a Mythic Raider, I'm not sure of any Mythic Raiders these days who are still going back and doing normal Uldir.
That's probably true.
And when a new tier comes out, when Battle of Dazara Lore comes out in Tides of Vengeance, Mythic guilds are probably going to jump into Heroic, then move on to Mythic. Normal won't really offer much for them. You might do it once or twice if you're trying to get specific trinkets or Azurite pieces, but you'll quickly leave it behind. And in terms of the gear gap, I think we've settled on 30 item levels per tier, and that is the right number, even if we had fewer tiers. Not that we're going to, but even if we did, if we assume that you're doing 2 tiers, basically, if you have Mythic gear right now, you're going to go into Heroic next difficulty. If that Heroic gear isn't an upgrade over the Mythic gear that you have today, then that's an odd place to be. Why are you even doing it? You're doing new content. You're learning new boss encounters.
Maybe you could make Mythic a little bit easier, and that way you wouldn't tune it for method. You could afford to make the Heroic gear less powerful. That would reduce the amount of stat inflation that you would have between each tier that basically accounts for an entire expansion nowadays. And that way, people would only have to do 1 difficulty. And you could combine the difficulties of probably normal and heroic and make the first half normal and the last half heroic. They've done that before anyway.
That for many guilds, again, not for method, but for a guild that, let's say, is 6 of 8 mythic at the end of Uldir, that's a guild that actually is going to spend some time going through heroic and then slowly progressing through mythic. If heroic isn't a source of upgrades, then the whole raid feels disappointing. You're spending weeks learning new fights, getting no rewards for it, and you're not getting it meaningfully more powerful in a way that's going to help you feel like you can push farther into mythic. So in order for heroic of next tier to beat mythic of this tier, we need a gap in item level of at least like 25 or 30. That's what we've settled on, and we feel like that's worked pretty well. Balance has felt good, and progression and rewards have felt meaningful as you go into a new raid tier with each new patch. And the last question from
here we go.
Christos Angelidis. During Legion, we saw long quest lines for the first time, quests that unlock new recipes for our professions, and those quest lines were engaging and fun experiences.
I thought a lot of people didn't
some
like
recipes
those.
like alchemy flasks had a different system that required the player to craft a ton of them, hoping to get a proc for a rank 3 recipe.
Okay.
A player with a rank 2 recipe and someone with an early super lucky rank 3 means hundreds of thousands of gold difference in earnings. A system such as this one, based on luck, is flawed as it has a negative impact to the economy of the server and the overall gameplay experience. What will your approach be on this issue? Will we see a different solution than the random proc system? Maybe a system similar to Legendary's progressive drop rates?
What's wrong with the random procs? Wait, let me go back and read this again. Sorry.
Early super lucky rank 3.
The proc for rank 3 recipe, a player with rank 2 recipe, and someone with an early super lucky proc. Well, I don't think this is a bad thing. I just don't think it should be determined by RNG. Right? I mean, I don't think this is that bad. I see why, obviously, it's not perfect. But they've had this ever since Burning Crusade. Like, if you were a transmute master, you were able to transmute extra primal mites. I know that because my mom did that. And it never destroyed the economy back then. It was just an extra bonus that somebody had because they spent more time on their profession.
Free means hundreds of thousands of gold. That isn't what he said?
Wait. What is he saying? Read it again. Okay, let me look at it again, because maybe I am missing something. During Legion, we saw long quest lines for the first time. Quests that unlock new recipes for our professions, and the quest lines were engaging and fun experiences. On the other hand, some recipes, like Alchemy Flask, had a different system that required the player to craft a ton of them. Hoping that they'll get a proc for a rank 3 recipe. A player with a rank 2 recipe and someone with an early super lucky rank 3 means hundreds of thousands of golds in difference. System as this one is based on luck alone. Certainly flawed, as negative impact to the economy on the server and overall gameplay experience. We see what will be your approach. Okay. I was reading something at the time. I misinterpreted what he said. Yeah, this is actually a good question. I don't think they should get rid of the procs for like getting extra items, but maybe procking up to the next skill level might be a little bit too much.
So, with professions, really, with every expansion, I would say throughout WoW's history, we've taken a slightly different approach to professions. You know, they're themed and rooted in their own individual expansion, whether that's heavily integrated with the garrison, as we saw in Warlords of Draenor, or very quest-driven and tied into world quests, as we saw in Legion. And part of that is delivery mechanisms for recipes and ways for crafters to differentiate themselves from each other. I think in a game where we have, tons and tons of blacksmiths, what makes me as a blacksmith different?
Somebody replied to my comment.
From you as a blacksmith. And for a long time in WoW, one of the things, I think a key thing there is, well, if I can make something that you can't, and you can make something that I can't, that makes us feel a bit different.
That's true.
And going way back, a lot of that was accomplished through rarity. I mean, way back in classic WoW days, 12 years ago, there were the handful of smiths on your server who might have the Arcanite Reaper plans that they got as a very low percentage drop, kind of luck-based, and that gave them a reward. I think a world where everyone can steadily progress towards making everything actually harms crafters' ability to get an economic advantage. It turns all crafters into basically the same thing. And so
that's actually very bad for the economy, because what happens whenever everybody can create the same thing with the same variables with no barrier to entry to being able to make the different items is that the items end up being sold below cost because people start making them in order to level up their skill profession. And the people that are actually playing the profession to make money off of it get completely fucked.
As we did in the past, jewel crafters using currency to purchase some recipes before others so they could focus on an undervalued piece of the market, while others got different ones. We'd like to find ways for people to have different recipes from each other. Now, obviously, if you never, ever get the thing that you want, that can be frustrating. So I think some sort of bad luck protection probably makes sense there. But, and this is, I'm thinking through a bit of this on the fly as I answer this question, but a route we're more likely to take is actually having enough variety in the meaningful recipes such that, you may not get that rank 3 recipe that you really want. But what if that's okay because you have a different rank 3 recipe that is also in high demand, and you can make your money by selling and crafting that one at a market advantage, while a different alchemist has their flask or their thing they can make.
Yeah,
and
of course.
As long as there is competitive advantage that you can get for dedicated crafters, that probably works out overall.
That's good.
I think the general topic of crafting, I think it's an area where we can do a lot better. I think part of
that's good. I like hearing that.
But I think we'd like to do more in terms of giving players opportunity to really feel like their identity can be one of a crafter, where I am a blacksmith, I am an alchemist, I spend tons of time and effort being better at this, and that has economic advantages, that maybe even has some power advantages. Now, we're not quite there yet, we know, but that's something we want to work towards. But one of the things that guides us in that is finding ways for players to differentiate themselves from each other so that not everyone is the same. Okay? Again, thank you for all of the great questions. And like I said at the start, it's a pleasure to be able to speak directly to the Greek WoW community. And I hope I get a chance to actually visit in person in the near future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Okay, great. I'm glad Ian did that. It's always good for him to do that. It makes a lot of sense. And except the lower thing. Wait, what is this here? No answers. I think that we got a few answers, right? But for the most part, like, so here's the issue, is that, and after this, yeah, I am going to play Dark Souls in a few minutes, guys. Actually, in like, I don't know, like maybe 5 or 10 minutes or something. I do want to talk about the video a little bit more as we go through all of this, right? That's totally what's going to happen. So, I think that obviously, like, what they're doing is good by, like, doing these different Q&As, and I always really appreciate them. And I hope that, I thought about doing, like, writing things, and maybe that would be, like, a better way for me to get my ideas out there to the developers and make sure that they can kind of see my point of view and why I think they're ruining the game with these decisions. And I think that if I do that, it probably would be more effective than me making a video, because it removes a lot of the noise of, like, you know, who am I, how am I saying it, what do I look like, you know, what's going on the screen. And if you just have words on a page, I feel like that might be a better and a stronger way for me to be able to communicate with them that's positive and productive. Send it to me, I would do it. You got an email? I know, man, I will. I've got to send it out somewhere. I remember whenever I did the Island Expedition post, right? And I can compare this, and I think that it was actually very effective. So this is a post that I made, problems and solutions regarding Island Expeditions. And let's look at here. They closer parity between mob difficulty. They did this. They nerfed some mobs and they made other ones a little bit stronger. Let's see, rethink the doubloon system. They did this. Tone down the bullshit items. They removed the items. Make arena frames activate. They haven't done that. Create more diverse PvE mechanics. They're doing that in 8.1. More deterministic rewards. They added a vendor. War mode system. That hasn't happened yet. Almost all of the things that I had wanted in this post happened. Now, I'm not saying it's because of my post, but I'm saying that obviously it makes me feel good, at least, whenever I read my suggestions on the patch notes. Okay? That's basically it. Get over a while already, they'll not read your post? Well, I don't know. I mean, like, I think that they probably do care. At least there's some people that care. So over here in WAD, here's a store mount, okay? Here's all the store mounts here. These are basically, like, remember how we watched the investors call and they were talking about making more advertisements in game? Here's one right here. And they're already ahead of themselves in 2014 with this vendor right here. Now, how much do you want to fucking bet that this person right here, the Dragon Rider trainee, or not the trainee, obviously, this one right here, is supposed to sell these Fey Dragons that you can learn and get for being exalted with, like, whatever the WAD reputation for this area was. Or the Flight Mastery. I don't even have the flight path, thank God. Or maybe this person right here, Fey Guardian Bashila. Doesn't this look like a vendor? Let's see what she says. Bright Eye is one of the smartest Fey Dragons we've trained in a Dracorium. He loves doing tricks for visitors. His favorite trick is taking $25 from you in order to ride him. Why don't you see if Bright Eye can do a trick for you? What is there to say, man? What is there to fucking say? I mean, I'm not particularly happy with that shit, dude. I was not happy at all. Make him do a trick, though. Well, I don't know how to make him do a trick, man. Since me, I know, Corn. I know. I'll keep it in mind. I definitely will. Tyson responded to you on Twitter. Really? Okay, what did he say? Alright, let me see what he said. Okay, dude. Okay, dude. Alright. I mean, look. I mean, what? I mean, I got him at the beginning. There's no way he's going to say anything else, right? I mean, if you can't say, I mean, he wasn't going to say something smart, so you might as well say something stupid, you know? Like, I mean, that's the way that it works, man. I don't worry about it.